All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back for those of you returning from our morning session. For those of you joining us for the first time, thank you for being here for the financial coaching for individuals with records portion of this training. My name is Andres Serrano. I am a financial coach with Heartland Alliance, financial coaching trainer. Um, we developed this training with some assistance from the Illinois Department of Commerce, basically to train providers in different areas on financial coaching techniques to address some of those financial challenges that our participants might be facing. So this portion takes a look at this portion of the presentation takes a look at individuals with records, some of the financial things that are affected by that, and maybe some coaching tools and practices that we can utilize with this specific population to best assist them as we help them navigate reentry and just obtaining financial wellness. So, to begin, I want to address basically individuals with records, what's affected. Um, if you all have experience working with this population, you know that basically a lot of aspects of daily life are kind of turned upside down once you have a record. So things that are really affected are like employment and obtaining employment, and a lot of it is that confidence that people have to obtain employment. Housing, obviously, we know that there are challenges with individuals with records to obtain housing. And so, how do we navigate kind of keeping people motivated throughout that process? Education, people's ability to access federal student aid is affected depending on the record itself, and we'll touch on that later on. Public benefits, again, maybe health benefits are not affected immediately upon maybe like release or reentry. However, other things such as like SNAP and TANF and other public benefits do have some requirements that might be affected by someone's like a presence of a record. Immigration goes without saying. Obviously, if you have a record, it might be kind of difficult for you to obtain maybe the status that you're looking for. And then in parentheses, the criminal debt, which is basically debt that has been accrued through your participation and your time in the system. And so what does that look like with like fees and making sure that you keep up with any debts that you might have as a result of being incarcerated. So those are all the things that are affected by people with individuals who might have a record. And so we're going to start kind of at the beginning of what that looks like as we're starting to help people navigate back into that process. And so a big theme that we talk about is documentation. It's important to talk about documentation because as you're kind of re-entering, you might not have access to all your documentation at that moment. And some of this documentation is needed to navigate kind of the systems, that you have to go through to either receive benefits or to just kind of live your day-to-day life. And so helping people identify where you can find these things. They might need help renewing their documents, opening a bank account. All of those things might require you to verify your identity. And so if you can try to do some of this stuff like pre-release, it'll help. If you're working with someone that close to release. There are like applications that you can help individuals fill, but they have application fees, and some states might provide cards for a reduced fee or for free. And so some of these things, documents that we might want to help our participants gather would be birth certificates, state ID or licenses, social security card. We want to help our participants review the records or the rap sheet to make sure that all the information that is being reported on those things is correct, if not, so that they can be disputed or corrected. We want to make sure that if people are in some kind of immigration process, that we're helping them obtain those documents as well. proof of residency if someone is not moving directly into, a residence with like a family member or has somewhere to stay. You might need a proof of residency from like a shelter or something if that is where they're kind of transitioning to before moving into more secure housing. And that one is kind of like the big one. So I did want to say that there's a homeless status certification ID. So what it is, it's a form that basically says that you're experiencing homelessness, so you can apply for a state ID card for free. And so you can get that form notarized before applying, and you can do that through a shelter or public service agency that can verify that. And so again, this is just kind of a resource that people can use in order to at least not have that extra expense of, documentation. The next part of the training is benefits. So we talk about benefits. And so we talk about how reentering or how the existence of a criminal record will affect you obtaining documents. And so I'm going to review that with you all, TANF and SNAP. So if you have a felony drug conviction after a certain date, there's a federal benefits. So for example, in Illinois, if it has been more than 2 years since your conviction, or if the individual is participating in or completed a treatment program, they're eligible for TANF and SNAP. If it has been either less than 2 years or they're not participating in a treatment program, then they would not be eligible. When it comes to obtaining SSI, which is Social Security income, it's not payable if convicted of a criminal offense or incarcerated more than 30 consecutive days. So like if you were receiving it and then you were incarcerated for more than 30 days, you will not be receiving that. However, it can be reinstated the month after the person is released. So what that means is that if it's been less than 12 months, it'll just reinstate automatically. However, it has been more than 12 months, that SSI will be terminated and the individual must reapply for benefits. So again, understanding kind of like the timeliness of applying for these benefits, right? Knowing that if it's going to be more than 12 months, that you're going to have to help someone navigate that process of reapplying. And then again, if they're released within the 12 months, it's just, you just need to request it immediately so that you don't have to basically reapply. And then SSDI, which is Social Security Disability Income, if it's, again, more than 30 days, it will be suspended. However, with disability, the benefits will be reinstated without a new claim. So again, helping individuals navigate kind of this process of applying for benefits as they kind of re-enter from, yes, being incarcerated. Does anybody have any questions up to this part where we talk about benefits? So do you have any questions about documentation or benefits? And just to inform you all, a lot of this training is informed by the CFPB's tool for reentry. So as I mentioned earlier, the CFPB has Your Money, Your Goals, which is a general kind of toolkit to give people information so that you can give information and have tools and resources at your disposal. And there is a specific toolkit that was created, which again will be sent to you all. It is a tomorrow by noon, which is in the chat, and I just want to remind you again. What that toolkit is specifically for reentry. So it has, when we talked about documentation, it has a checklist for documentation. As we talk about benefits, it's the same thing. There is a checklist that says these are the things that are needed, and this is how you would either be eligible or not be eligible. So there are present tools that you can use as a way to help screen and help you kind of navigate what you need to collect, what information, and if you need to reapply or not reapply.
Andres, we don't have any questions at this point.
All right, perfect. So we can move on to the next part. Employment. So when it comes to finding employment for an individuals with records, what in my experience, a lot of what I've seen is that as a coach, a lot of it is really helping individuals maintain motivation to continue with the job hunt, right? I mean, if myself, maybe like as someone who has never, had to deal with, myself reentry, if it's difficult for individuals to find jobs and to manage finding employment without a record, think of how much more challenging it is with a record, right? What are the barriers that are imposed, not only by the system, but like what are those perceived barriers that someone has? If you were in the first session, we talked about TIP. TIP is transforming impossible into possible. It's really about helping individuals identify those barriers and then find hope actions around them. And I think that this is a good time to really think about that. For individuals with records, just because there is that added layer of, okay, now how does society see me? It's not only actual barriers, but also now kind of my own personal barriers of how I'm viewed, how I'm perceived, and what my motivation is to to really come back and reintegrate myself. And so I think as coaches, we really need to empower our participants through information like this is what the Fair Reporting Credit Act does, this is what the Equal Opportunity does, right? Legally, these are your things, but also personally, how are you going to stay motivated? What are the things that are holding you back from, trying to obtain employment or really trying to go for it? Um, so yeah, it's not going to be, and that a lot of times as you kind of transition back and you realize that there are a lot of those societal barriers, you might have to motivate the individual or really work with the individual to brainstorm other kind of non-traditional ways of obtaining employment, whether it's entrepreneurship or whatever that individual's idea of like making it work and hustling and really kind of using their resources. um, but I do want to talk about the Fair Reporting Credit Act. So when it comes to employment and background screening, these are kind of individuals' rights. Um, Under the FCRA, the employer must provide a written notice that they are going to get a consumer report, right? And that's for anyone. If there's going to be a background check, they need to let you know. And now, if they want to take an action based on that report, they must give you a copy of that report and explain to you why. Okay. Um, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission states that basically, in most cases, employers may not automatically bar anyone just because they have an arrest or a record. Okay, they're basically supposed to take into consideration. But again, this is just guidance, right? And when we talk about housing, you're going to see the difference between kind of recommendations and then what is the actual law, which I think there's still a disconnect there. And so it gives landlords and it gives housing providers, I think, a little bit more power in deciding whether or not they give someone housing based on that. Um, if you're working with maybe youth who have been previously incarcerated, just know that the Youth Opportunity and Fairness Act basically says that they're strengthening confidentiality laws. A lot of the times, information for minors gets kind of distributed in different way than adults because of just the differences that people think there are of like information insecurity for both of those populations. And so we just want you to know that there are sanctions for unlawful record sharing and that there are confidentiality laws that are put in place to really secure our youth. And there's also expanded youth access to expungement. And we're going to talk a little bit more about expungement as well and kind of what are some opportunities for you to provide for your participants in terms of looking at the record and modifying that as best as they can to just open up more opportunities. Um, and then I want to talk a little bit about Ban the Box. So Ban the Box has been in effect since January 2015. So Ban the Box is basically saying that they want to ban that box that says, have you been previously convicted, so that it doesn't become the first thing that would automatically bar you from obtaining employment, if that makes sense. So give me a second. Okay. So basically, okay. It's basically saying that employers should not inquire about an applicant's criminal history until after the initial qualifications have been reviewed. Okay. However, that doesn't mean that the employer may not make a decision to give or not give employment based on that background check. It just means that other things are supposed to take priority in the decision making for that individual to obtain or not obtain employer, right? Um, However, the law does not require that employers hire applicants with criminal history. So as you see, there's a lot of kind of back and forth and a lot of not clarity between what's recommended and what's actually being able to legally made. And I think that that is where we really need to motivate our participants, because it requires sometimes sharing your story and being open about your experience and maybe kind of being vulnerable and using, your previous experience to really kind of help move you to the next level, right? Because if someone is still going to see if I have a record or not, and then they're going to try to make a decision based on that, we just want to make sure that participants are able to tell their story and to really state their case and feel motivated and empowered within that process of looking for a job. A little bit more about Man the Box. It doesn't cover everyone. It only covers employers with 15 or more employees, unless, okay. And here's the thing: these are the law. These are the not three cases where the ban the box does not apply. Um, if it's certain occupation under federal or state law, like that requires a background check, then you have to do it, right? Sometimes there are positions that require a fidelity bond or equivalent. So if someone is kind of like vetting for you and putting themselves at risk, then they could make that decision based on your record. Or if the employer is hiring someone under the Emergency Medical Services Act, the EMS Systems Act. And so again, you might have some financial jobs or some like medical jobs that still would require them to really know what happened and can actually use that against you legally without repercussion. So again, I think another good tool and thing that I do during this time is, as I'm job hunting with individuals who might have records or where it might be an issue, is really helping identify first what is the goal of that person, right? What kind of jobs they want, and then going through those jobs and being like, okay, what are the requirements? And really preparing, like, these might be some of the conversations that you're going to have, or just know that legally they can ask you and make a decision based on this thing. And so do you want to proceed or not? And how can we best prepare for that? And if you want to submit a complaint where like you believe that that box was, if you see that box, or if you believe that you were unfairly not given a job because of that, you can always dispute and you can submit a complaint. And so there's a link for that. And again, I'm going to share this PowerPoint by noon tomorrow, so you'll have access to this information. Now I want to talk about housing. All right. So as we explore housing with participants, this is another big challenge, right? And it's because if you're working with landlords who own a home, and maybe it's not just like a big housing management company, it's a landlord themselves. They have some power to make decisions because it is their home, and depending on like the size of the home, they're able to make decisions of whether or not they house you. And so again, this is recommended. This isn't even legal. And I think, again, this is where, as coaches and as like providers and workforce providers and coaches and individuals who are working with this population, I think this is where we can like advocate, because this is just guidance that was released in 2016 by HUD. And it's like, these are some blanket policies to make sure that you are not just making a decision based on an arrest, okay? And so what it does is it indicates that if you are a housing provider that excludes individuals because of one or more arrests, that's not enough to say that it's not discriminatory, okay? You cannot just say based on this one arrest, right, without any conviction, that is not enough to say I'm not going to give you housing. It could be substantial, legitimate, or non-discriminatory. It's basically saying that you're discriminating. And so the guidance also says that the landlord has a policy of excluding anyone, all right, unless it is a demonstrable risk to the people living in that building or to the property. So that's the thing. If you can prove that that's going to be a risk for your property or yourself, then that can bar you from it, and it's basically non-discriminating. And so what that does is, I mean, it's a very big gray area um, to help people get housed because there are so many kind of unclear things. Um, in these situations, as a coach, I like to keep my participants motivated throughout the process of looking for housing. One of the things that we've spoken to participants about is how can you talk about your story, about what happened, but how can you also talk about like your future and really thinking about where you want to go, right? Because a lot of the times you're going to have to, and we know this as grant writers and we know this as individuals who work in this field, you have to tell a story in order for people to really understand how complex the whole situation is. And so if we can coach our participants through creating a narrative and to really become comfortable in just sharing their story and in sharing their goals, that might actually positively impact their ability to obtain housing. So I think that as coaches, that is something very tangible that we can do, even though a lot of the screening and a lot of the way that people make decisions might be a little bit discriminatory. I think that's how we can kind of empower and prepare individuals to just share their story. Um, does anybody here have any experience helping an individual with um, a record obtain housing? And if you have any tips, please feel free to share them in the chat. And then we can, share them with the rest of the group. Um, And as you're kind of sharing that information, I'm gonna kind of start talking about, okay, background screenings. A lot of people are gonna be pulling your background and pulling your information to make decisions about whether or not you get benefits, um, whether or not you get housing, whether or not, right, you get financial aid. And so a big point of conversation with individuals who have, who are reentering is how do we make sure that your background screen, that your background reports and all of that is correct? Because I think that's a big point of at least, it's the same thing as when we talk to people about credit reports. We want to make sure that although it's scary to look at, individuals feel comfortable, one, accessing it, two, reviewing it, and three, being able to talk about it and dispute any inaccuracies. So you want to make sure that you're looking for things like identity mix-ups, multiple listings, maybe incomplete information or things that are older. And there in the PowerPoint, you'll have kind of a process to disputing those reports. And it's basically it's very familiar as to kind of talking about and disputing credit report, things on your credit report. You call the company, you tell them there's a mistake. You want to make sure that you get things in writing so that there's documentation and proof. And then it usually takes about 30 to 45 days to get fixed. And then that agency must now send the correct information to the employer, right? Especially if the employer is using this information to decide whether or not you get employment or you maintain employment, which is something that happens. When it comes to things on your credit reporting agencies may not report arrests other than crime convictions, which are more than 7 years old. And the information must be accurate. Again, you can dispute this information. And so really just knowing what information can and cannot be in your reports and what can people access. And I think that definitely like starts to lead us into, we're going to be talking a little bit about just how individuals can utilize services to really just kind of clear up their report as much as they can and what access they give people permission to see, right? Because at the end of the day, if you do something where you can hide part of your record, and so it doesn't really affect the way you're obtaining things. You can go ahead and do that through expungement and sealing. So you want to contact the agencies or agencies that submitted information to the FBI. I want to reference again that CFPB reentry guide, which I will be sharing with you. It has how to dispute those errors in criminal records, and it has it as a checklist. So again, a really useful and powerful tool as you're helping people navigate this process. So I do want to focus a little bit on expungement and sealing, and I want to say that these are basically options for you to decide what gets shared with individuals and what doesn't get shared. And so expungement, what it does is erases non-convictions, and this includes most juvenile records. So really what it does is it removes criminal records from public view. Okay, other ways that it can be talked about, it would be like erasure, destruction, sealing, but sealing is a little bit different. I'll talk about that. Each state has different rules for doing this. And so you definitely want to make sure you help people navigate that process. And again, helping people decide or realize what can be expunged and what cannot be expunged. And a lot of these things like sealing, although things are hidden from maybe public view for maybe like credit report or other things, some individuals, based on the report they're obtaining, might still have this information. It's not like it goes away completely forever. It's actually still accessible. It might just be obstructed. And so again, helping them navigate that, like, although you might not be able to see it and it might help you in this case, you might still see it if XYZ, right? And when it comes to sealing, basically every felony is eligible, and so every felony is eligible except for DUI, reckless driving, animal crime, sex offenses, except for prostitution or misdemeanor, indecency, and domestic battery and order of protection. So knowing that those are not eligible for sealing. So as you're helping people navigate this process of like, okay, what can be hidden and what can't, this is something that cannot. So then if you are working with someone under that, you're going to have to find other ways of kind of navigating that conversation. It hides convictions from public view, and like I said, except in various kind of ways. And so the people that might still be able to see it are law enforcement, and then those employers required to run state police fingerprint background checks. For example, if you work like at a shelter or if you work with youth, a lot of those times they require those fingerprint background checks. And so although you might have gotten something sealed, it will still pop up in that report because of the person requesting it. Also for sealing, you have to wait 3 years. So there is a time frame. You have to wait 3 years from completion of your last adult sentence, or you can do it while serving your last sentence as long as the individual is earning a high school diploma, GED, college or vocational certificate. Okay, so that also, if you don't want to wait all 3 years, you can encourage someone to think about their other goals, and if they're educational or career minded, that might actually benefit the participant here. And so now legal debt. I really like talking about this because this really goes to show you the impact of the criminal justice system on individuals' finances. These are all the fees that individuals who have gone through the system are responsible for, okay, or may be responsible for. There are pre-conviction fees, which include jury fees, or even applications just to get a public defender. There are sentencing fees, which could be like fines or fees for administrative costs. There's like reimbursement fees that you're responsible for. There are incarceration fees, meaning that you have to pay fees just to be incarcerated. So if someone's actually gone through that process, there are fees associated with that. And then there are probation and parole supervision fees. So depending on what your sentence was, or depending on what the agreement is post-release, you might have to have drug testing fees, or you might have to have things for your vehicle if it was a DUI. If it was a drug-related use, you might have to have some treatment fees or therapy fees or class fees. So there are so many financial responsibilities for an individual who is reentering, and we have to think this individual has not been working. There might not be savings. There might have been accruing more debt while they were inside, while they were in the system. And now there's all these fees on top of that. So how can we help someone get organized and really think about all of these fees? I think as a coach, where we can be most successful with this is really helping individuals navigate prioritization of these fees, right? And then navigating what options are available for these fees. So the CFPB tool for reentry has a form that has a series of questions, and it asks you, okay, what is the fee? Who is this fee owed to? And I think most importantly, it has a third section which says, what are the repercussions of not keeping up with this? One thing we need to think as coaches is that when it comes to debt related to reentry, sometimes if you do not keep up with certain things, that might actually put you back into the system. And it might actually hold you back, or actually someone might take legal action based on that. And so we want to make sure that participants are aware of that, right? Because although it is a lot to manage, we want to make sure that if your goal is to not re-enter, that is not going to be a possibility by managing those things. So I would encourage you as coaches to really help people organize themselves and then explore opportunities under those different things to see if either they can make a payment plan, they can get a reduction, or if they can get a waiver. Because if you can help them navigate through what are your options first, we can figure out what either can be postponed or what can be not a priority because we're going to go ahead and find a resource for it, right? If you don't know if you owe fees, you can help an individual contact the court or really talk to their lawyer or probation officer. Again, you want to make sure that you are helping them think and helping participants think about what are the repercussions of not keeping up with this. Because I think that's really a big motivating factor. If you can connect it to their goals, that could be a huge motivating factor to just kind of think about their legal debt and not just put it to the side and allow it to cause more problems. And so now I want to talk about child support debt. So child support debt is like a big thing, whether individuals are incarcerated or not incarcerated. What I wanted to talk about here is that if you are incarcerated and you do have child support debt, Illinois allows for modification of order. Of course, that requires the individual to kind of take care of the bulk of the work. So they have to make the request, they have to follow up. But if we can inform individuals that there is a way to kind of modify that order, either so that it's not accruing during the time that you are incarcerated, or if it's going to be modified in terms of time or amount, that gets done. What this does is it basically just kind of frees up some space of mind for individuals to know that they have options. So before we move on to the rest, does anybody have any questions about the stuff that we have just talked about?
Yes, there is one question. Is there an organization that offers support for applying for this modification?
For modification of child support, right?
Child support's modification.
Okay, I don't have that information on me, but I will do some research and I will share that resource with you in that follow-up email tomorrow. If anybody else knows of a resource that helps individuals, please feel free to share it. Otherwise, I will, like I said, get back to this individual with that information in the follow-up email. No other questions?
No, thank you.
Okay, awesome. Or maybe Barbara can help me look for that as well, and maybe she can share before this presentation is over. So I want to kind of shift gears, moving from debt to moving to student loans. Okay, so we're thinking about that. So obviously, if a participant has student loans or existing student loans, you want to help them navigate that process again of like deferment, the same thing that I talked about in the youth section. Use the CFPB website to really help participants navigate either pay as you earn repayment plans, income-based repayment plans, um, or deferment or forbearance, right? And then think about this and have those conversations about how this will affect their other things, such as either their ability to access more student loans or their ability to, just maintain like a build credit, right? How if you're not either on a payment plan or they're not deferred, that it's negatively affecting your credit. So you do want to have that conversation with participants with existing loans. And then let's say as you're goal planning, now you have participants who want to go back to school and want to take advantage of education. Um, Letting individuals know that if they are eligible for financial student aid, that depending on, the record, it might affect your ability to obtain that student aid. For example, here are a few things. If you were an adult and you were in possession or sale of illegal drugs, if you were receiving student aid during that time, it will be suspended. Okay. Another thing, when you're applying for student loans, there's a worksheet where if you disclose a conviction, it will decide whether or not that conviction is eligible, if you're going to be eligible for student loans based on that. Okay. So again, as we talk about sharing your record and disclosing your story, knowing that that may have an impact with your student loans, and because it's a federal program, that basically the law is saying, okay, based on this thing, you may or may not receive it, and helping people stay motivated within that. And again, finding alternatives. Maybe there are scholarships for individuals reentering, right? As we think about services and resources for individuals in like very specific communities, you want to make sure that you really think about, is there something specifically for this community? And I think when we get to talk about individuals with disabilities, you will see that there's a lot of resources for specific communities, and you just want to make sure that we can help people navigate that. Um, so we have some reentry resources here. The U.S. Department of Justice Federal Interagency Reentry Council is basically a huge list of individuals in different areas and different organizations that work in helping participants reenter. And so there are resources around housing, there are resources around debt, there are resources legal. And so you definitely want to make sure that you leverage that information um, so that you can help your participants best. Um, there's a few other resources such as the Department of Labor American Job Centers. So again, trying to leverage um, what state resources are available to help us find employment and navigating that employment conversation with participants, right? What are you eligible for? What are you not? And how can we prepare you just to feel confident to apply and motivated, because there might be a lot of denied applications, right? And so as coaches, we definitely want to make sure that we're right there with the participant, kind of helping them step by step. Defy Ventures is an entrepreneurship organization. Oh, it's an organization that promotes entrepreneurship in the reentry community. So if you want more information, you can check them out. And then the rest of these are Illinois programs and organizations to, again, help participants who are reentering and who might have criminal records navigate the system. And a lot of them will have either job training or job coaching and opportunities for individuals to think about employment that is relevant and that they're able to access. Think about the CTA even has a program, which the name is escaping me right now. But the CTA has like a reentry program where people can start working with the CTA. It is a strict program, and so you want to help keep participants motivated, right? It's rather unfortunate that you have to prove yourself again through job training programs, um, and kind of like rigid rules. But again, these are to help prepare you to what's coming, right? For example, like CARE program or the CTA program have very kind of attendance rules, and they have time rules, and they have all these things that you might be important in terms of job training to really help prepare our population best. Um, and yeah, so we do have the child support resources. It's actually called Project Clean Slate. So there are two clean slates. So I want to make sure that you one is a kind of like a job training program, and the other through Kara, and the other one is called Project Clean Slate, which will allow you to navigate the child support modification process, as well as what do I do now that I'm back and responsible for this debt. So that kind of answers our question from earlier. Barbara, did you have something to say? No? Okay. And then I think another big talking point for us is just how do you navigate legal aid and what services are provided. As many of you may already know, Cabrini Green Legal Aid is kind of a big organization that helps with sealing and expungement and just legal representation here in the city of Chicago. And so helping participants, I think, as a coach, obtain the documents that they need to receive services, kind of compiling that information, going over talking points or things that are important. I think just having a referral kind of process, if you work with a lot of these individuals who might have records, having a referral process that's a little bit more clear, I think that will kind of help you navigate the system a little easier. There is Legal Aid Chicago and Illinois Legal Aid, which are, again, just legal aid organizations that have intake processes. You can go in there to either get more information, or you can go in there to just obtain legal recourse depending on your situation and see how they can assist you. So helping individuals kind of navigate that process. Um, any questions before we move on to kind of like our case study and we kind of
Yes.
wrap up this section? Yeah.
So we have a question that says, are there agencies that help clients find employment that have backgrounds?
Okay. There are. I have a list. I can't think of it off the top of my head. But I do have a list that I will share. Agencies that help employees with backgrounds. I
Yes.
will send that list because I do have one or two organizations that specifically are basically dedicated to this, and they'll definitely have more resources.
Okay, thank you.
Great. So I really want you to think as coaches, because a lot of us might not work necessarily with a lot of individuals who might be re-entering the system. We might have someone on our caseload who has a record. Um, in my personal experience, by the time they reach me as a financial coach, because they've already kind of either been referred through another program or they've been in the system for a minute, they've already learned how to kind of navigate that. And a lot of the challenges are, okay, like this is already expunged and I'm getting ready to like go into job like that, get ready to look for a job. So a lot of it is really kind of that motivational piece that I'm providing as a financial coach. That might look the same for you all. It might look different. You might be actually helping individuals who might have just been re-entering. And so I just want you to think about how at different points of someone's involvement with the criminal justice system, you're gonna support them, right? Because it might require more motivation at the beginning and just kind of really helping navigate all those things that we talked about and resources, or it might just be kind of really doing the coaching aspect and like really thinking about, okay, what are your barriers? What are like your not only external barriers, but what are your internal barriers to obtaining, to getting to the next level for you, right? So I want you to think about that as we do this case study. and really how would you motivate this individual to kind of how would you coach this person? All right, and I want you to write this and your ideas in the chat. So James has referred to you after disclosing to his case manager that he needs help creating a resume because he's looking for employment. So you notice there's a huge gap, and you're like, what's going on? And he states that he was previously incarcerated. He then mentions that looking for jobs is a challenge because he feels that no one will hire him upon disclosing his criminal record. So, as a financial coach, what are some things that you can tell James, or what are some resources or tools that you can share with James just to help motivate him throughout this process?
So Andres, I'm waiting to get feedback from our attendees. Give us
Okay.
One of the statements is ask him if he has learned any skills while incarcerated.
That's a great idea, right? Anytime that we have gaps in employment history, you definitely want to think about, okay, what other things did I do during that time? And do I have any transferable skills, right? We talk about a lot about transferable skills. So I think that that's great, helping an individual identify things they might have learned during maybe a not so positive experience, right? That we can incorporate.
Another is take the skills and what any courses, take the skills and what any learning courses or certificates during that time.
Yes, right. Again, figuring out what kind of things can I do to prepare myself and to make myself feel more confident as I re-enter kind of the working, the field, the work field. Whether it's a course, whether it's a job training program, or whether it's just, even picking up computer skills or anything like that, whatever that individual feels they might help them feel a little bit more prepared, exploring that. Absolutely.
So that's it. There's not anything additional at this time.
Okay. I think Barbara's been trying to say something. Barbara can.
Barbara, are you there?
Let's see. Barbara. No. Sorry, Torlin. I don't know what I did. Can you make me the presenter again, please? Sorry. Okay. Okay. Well, I'm just because we're kind of running really quickly with this training. I'm gonna do one more case study before we wrap up. Um, Same thing. If you have any feedback about how we can coach this individual, please put it in the chat. So Stacy's referred to you because she wants to go back to school. She mentions that she wants to find out more about financial aid, and she says she has a record. She also wants to know how to access loans and how she can prepare. So how can we help Stacy stay motivated and also navigate this financial aid process? What kind of information would you tell Stacy? How would you coach her?
So we're just waiting for people to share.
Yeah, and then we'll wrap up. I think Barbara's trying to log in. I think Barbara wanted to share some of her knowledge as well.
So we don't have anything, I'm sorry.
Okay, no, that's fine. Really, I mean, when it comes to Stacy, we would definitely want to just help navigate that financial aid process, really kind of show any resources we may have, such as like the CFPB tool, um,
So
reviewing. Yeah,
I have something just come in, so I want to share with you. Is it okay?
yeah, absolutely.
So learn what she's been doing since her release and ask if she has been working on some additional things. We need to know a little bit more about why Stacy was incarcerated so we can refer her to the right resources. One person stated, I guess I would ask a lot of questions. And then I probably would ask her to get me a copy of her city and state records.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think that helping someone navigate that process of obtaining the records or really disclosing what it is, right? Because if it doesn't affect, if the conviction doesn't affect the obtaining of financial aid, you can help navigate financial aid like regularly, right? But if they're either unsure or they just want to make sure, you would help them exactly obtain the reports, review that, make sure things are clear, and then absolutely ask, what have you been doing since then? How can we use that information to really just kind of inform and really motivate you as you move into financial aid and into, higher education? Um, all right, maybe we can ask Barbara the other questions after. But if you have no final questions about reentry, I think I want to leave with this. Helping individuals when they have criminal records is extremely frustrating because of all those kind of things that are unclear, that are suggestions but not necessarily legal. And so really I think in this section and for this population, so much is empowerment, right? As well, I think this one in disabilities is so much about empowerment. It really is about helping individuals, coaching them through, what do you do if this falls through? Because I think a lot of it is getting, a lot of pushback. And so talk to your participants and create those strategies. If this happens, what am I going to do to continue to stay motivated, right? I understand that disputing things on my reports is going to be hard. And I understand that there's time limits to, me having to wait 3 years until I'm able to either access something or I'm able to get something sealed or expunged. And so much of your job as a coach is really to maintain those individuals motivated, connected to their goals, and really help explore ways that they can, with their previous experiences and their previous just kind of ability to overcome issues, how can we leverage that and continue to stay motivated through this extremely kind of frustrating process? Um, I will go ahead and tomorrow I will share the organization that helps with the modification of child support, the link for Project Clean Slate, as well as any others I may find. And I will also share agencies that help with employment for individuals with backgrounds. Okay. Is there anything else that you would like me to share before we wrap up this part of the training?
No, it's just letting everyone know that the materials are going to be available by noon. So that includes all the information that was shared. We want to make sure that Andres and Heartland has enough time to go back and evaluate to make sure all of these items are available to all of us by noon. So just wanting to let everybody know that.
Great.
And inside the actual chat, one more thing is that the actual survey link is there for the Survey Gizmo link for the parts of the presentation that you were part of today. If you want to wait until the very last part of the presentation to complete it, it's great. If we can get that information, as much feedback as we can, is greatly appreciated. So thank you.
And I will also share that link within the follow-up email to give everyone a last opportunity to fill that out.
So it seems like one more question.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and so those follow-up steps, one person just posed a question. So the follow-up steps with the information from the webinar, all that information is going to come to you tomorrow by noon. So you'll get a communication coming from Andres outlining where all the information is going to be. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. You will receive a link to access the Dropbox materials in which you will find all the tools that we've kind of been talking about. So the reentry guide from CFPB, as well as this PowerPoint. And then I will send links for the follow-up stuff that we spoke about.
So thanks, everyone.
Absolutely. With that, I will see you all at 2 p.m. Thank you, Torlin.
Thank you.